In this video, I wanted to talk about the Sony A7C and what I think about it after having it for about a year. And it's gonna be my honest truth, so I hope that Sony is not listening. Fair? Okay, let's do this. Now, I don't know if it's something that YouTubers tend to do because they follow other YouTubers, and it seems like most famous YouTubers, they always end up getting a full frame camera. Now, I made a video about this, and I'm gonna leave a link in the description if you wanna expand further on this topic about full frame versus crop sensor and stuff like that. But it feels like that most content creators eventually end up getting a full frame camera. So I'm gonna be honest with you, this is actually my first full frame camera. After owning it for about a year, I have to tell you that there is something about that full frame look that I absolutely love and adore. And once you go full frame, you basically never go back. I think that's fair to say. But full frame cameras are not always perfect. Now, the first thing that I want to mention is the size of the lenses. Now, they might look professional and sexy, and they are, let's face it. I mean, I also have something like this. This is a 35 Samyang f1.4. You get very sharp images with this thing, and it's just wonderful to shoot on this thing. On the camera itself, I do have the Tamron 28-75 f2.8. This is a classic. This is something that a lot of YouTubers pretty much have. It's a very good zoom lens, and I like it. Looking at the size factor of the Sony A7C compared to the lens itself, you can see that something is kind of off here. You know, it seems like this is a lot smaller, and it's true when you hold it in your hand, it feels like there's also always this tipping feeling because the lens is sometimes very big. And there's more than that. Like, there is also the fact that because they focus so much on making this as compact as possible, it's not very grip friendly. Okay, so there's me just being honest with you that had I purchased this camera again, the answer is probably no. This is not a deal breaker. I'm still gonna use it for a long time, I think. I have no real interest in upgrading this camera anytime soon. I will have to mention that I'm sort of levitating to, like, if I was going to get a new camera today, it would be something like the Sony A7 IV. I actually think that one is very interesting. And for those of you thinking about Sony A7S III, I am just not interested in that camera because even though I don't take a lot of pictures, I still prefer to have at least 24 megapixels on my mirrorless camera. And I have lots of cameras in this room. And yes, obviously resolution is not very important, but to me it is important when I'm shooting photos and stuff like that and I'm editing, I want to have a lot of resolution. So that's just my personal preference. So 24 is, like, I definitely prefer this camera over owning something like the Sony A7S III, which sounds crazy, I know, and that camera is so much better in so many other ways, but this camera is, number one, it's affordable, it still shoots 24 FPS, 4K, pretty much as crisp as the A7S III. Now in low light situation, that one is a lot better, but I think that this one is really amazing. But I will give it to the Sony A7S III that it's a lot nicer to hold. You know, the grip is much nicer. You got better image stabilization. And speaking of image stabilization, I was actually under the impression, wrongfully so, that the Sony A7C, this camera, it has active image stabilization because there is image stabilization in here, but it's not active, and apparently it's a lot worse than active. So that's a big bummer because I'll be honest, I'll be the first to admit it, I don't think that the image stabilization on the Sony A7C is very good, especially with something like the Panasonic GH5, which I'm recording on right now in case you're wondering. The image stabilization on the GH5 is just beautiful, just amazing, but it has some other flaws, which I'll get into in another video. But the image stabilization on the Sony A7C is just not very good. And I'm gonna be completely honest with you, like a lot of people talk about the Sony ZV-1, like if the image stabilization there is a lot better. I don't really think it's awesome. to be honest. But luckily for me, I do have my GoPro, and I even think that my iPhone has a much more stable shot than the Sony ZV-1. Now it sounds maybe like I'm bashing the Sony ZV-1, which I'm absolutely not. I love that thing, and I can't wait for the Sony ZV-2, what it will have. Like, I'm really hoping it's gonna have really interesting features, okay? That's what I'm saying. But getting back to this camera, so a lot of things that I do like about it. The screen, there is the flip out. I really enjoy that. Something that I pretty much think that all YouTubers have to have. And it's not just so you can, you know, see yourself. It's not just about that, but you can also have some pretty interesting angles. You can shoot like this. I mean, like, you can really utilize that flip screen in so many different ways. So I like that. There is a mic input. The gain is pretty okay. I like that. There is only one SD card slot. Now, I do like that, but I recently shot a wedding and I was kind of hoping to have two because it would just feel a lot safer to record on two memory cards at the same time. But this has never been an issue. I've never had problems with SD cards ever. I do like that it's USB-C, which is something that the Sony ZV-1 does not have. It has like micro USB. I mean, come on, that's so 2008, you know what I mean? Battery life, very good on the Sony A7C. I really like it. And there are just so many amazing lenses out there if you have a Sony camera. That brings me to another thing that I just don't like about the Sony A7C. Now I'm gonna mix the good with the bad somehow. So I don't like the fact that this menu system is just horrible. And there's a lot of features that I miss. And I do miss function buttons, you know, that you can program yourself, like the GH5. It has so many function buttons on the entire camera, and the menu there is just so much better. And the screen on the Sony A7C is good, but it doesn't really have that touch that I really like. Like, you can just use it some situations, but not to flip through the menus. But the menu system is just horrible. It's just absolutely horrible. It's gotten better on the newer Sony cameras, so that's a good plus. I just, like, if you're wondering if the ZV-1 has that same horrible menu, yes, it has the same horrible menu as it has here. And there's a lot of features I sort of miss. I sort of miss like a time-lapse mode, like a real time-lapse mode. My iPhone has it, the GoPro Hero 10 has it, but Sony cameras, for some reason, it just seems like they don't believe in having a 4K time-lapse mode. And what I mean is that with this is that, yes, you can do a time-lapse. You can set it up to take pictures every 5 or 10 seconds or whatever, and then put it all together in some software. But what I prefer with those cameras is that they create the 4K time-lapse directly in the camera. So that's something that I kind of miss on the Sony A7C. That's a real bummer, I think. Now, moving on to something good about the Sony A7C. The autofocus, my goodness. I had no idea how much I would depend on autofocus when I got this camera. When I was using the GH5 only, I was basically never using autofocus. I was always using manual focus. Like, for now, if you're wondering how I'm getting the focus on my face, well, basically I use my smartphone just to do like a tap to focus kind of a thing, and that's why my face is in focus. But the autofocus on the GH5, it's just horrible. It's not very reliable. But on the Sony A7C, all Sony cameras pretty much have outstanding, not just autofocus, but like eye tracking. Like, even just looking at the screen, the flippy screen, when I'm recording myself with the Sony A7C, I can always see if I'm in focus, if my eye is being tracked and stuff like that. So it's just beautiful. I think it's only maybe happened like once or twice out of many times that I've had issues with the autofocus. But other than that, just fantastically reliable. One thing that I don't like about the Sony A7C is the file system. Like, when you take out the memory card of this thing and you put it into your computer, MacBook or what have you, you get these really weird folders, and it creates these uninteresting files like thumbnail files and XML files and just stuff that I really don't need, and you can't like remove it or anything like that. And they put pictures and videos in different folders. When I take out photos and videos from my GH5, it's all in one folder. I just take it out, I just delete it, it's done. And so I don't know, there's something about that file format that just doesn't feel right to me. You know, I can't really get used to it. It's just kind of annoying. I mean, it's not a deal breaker. I'm just saying that's one of those things that I really wish that it could have fixed. The file system. Yeah, I know, I'm being picky there, but yeah. The app for the Sony cameras, this is a thing that I really think that Panasonic does a lot better. Like, you have all the features there. You can do so much in the Panasonic image app. I really prefer Panasonic right there. Like, it feels like Panasonic is more into software, and when it comes to Sony, they focus more on the sensor, the noise reduction and stuff like that, just creating that perfect or stellar image, and they do it tremendously well. I just wish they worked a bit more on the software. You know, software is key to everything as far as I'm concerned. Just look at smartphones, just look at the iPhone, just look at Samsung phones. Like, you can do amazing things if you have the good software, you know. And speaking of image quality, like, the noise levels on this thing are just so low. Now, I'm not sure if it's just the sensor size. Like, a lot of people go like, yeah, but full frame, it's got full frame, that's why the image is so noise free. That's not the entire truth. Like, if I was to compare the Panasonic GH5, which is just a tiny micro four thirds sensor, I still think that it would handle low light situation a lot better than something like an old Canon 5D Mark II, you know, because even if it's a bigger sensor, it's all about how you treat the image, the noise removal and stuff like that. And so it's not just a sensor. There's something magical going on with the Sony image algorithms. Now, there's a lot of people who have been complaining about the Sony colors, especially if you compare it to something like a Canon camera. And I do get the criticism. It's not a huge deal to me because I always do a little light, not color grading, but color correcting, so to speak, in post-production. So it's not a big deal to me. I don't use LUTs. I do use one of the profiles on the camera, but I never, you know, use some special LUT files or anything like that. I just do a little bit of color correcting. I'm not going for any particular style or anything like that. I just want my image to be as realistic as possible. I really, really like the Sony A7C. That's the God honest truth. I really do. My number one complaint, actually it's two complaints. My first one being the grip, the design being so ergonomically limited. And the second thing would be the lack of 4K 60 FPS. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the slow motion on this thing. The 1080p 120 frames per second on the Sony A7C is spectacular, works really, really well. But 4K 60, that's something that I would have preferred for my B-roll shots and stuff like that. And also, I would have to say that the image stabilization, it could be a lot better. But then again, I've just found out recently that this doesn't actually have active image stabilization. And I haven't actually tested a lens with built-in stabilization, so maybe I'll give that a go, try a lens like that. But yeah, anyway, just wanted to share my thoughts about the Sony A7C, a very good camera, and I really like it. But if I was going to get a new camera today, it would probably be the Sony A7 IV, which has better image stabilization, which has 4K 60 and like something like 30 megapixels. So that's a better camera, but it is a bit more expensive, so there is that. But this is a camera that you invest in for, I wouldn't say a lifetime, but for many years at least to come. And you know, I'm using this mostly indoors, and so I can handle some of the design flaws and stuff like that. I'm not that picky, you know. Some of the things I mentioned are kind of picky, but what I mean is like, these are not deal breakers, you know. So yeah, anyway, that's all I have for today. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.